Hello, and thank you for joining us for the special program with the Met. My name is Padma Rajendran, and I am a teaching artist at the Met. Today, we are inspired by this vase from 1880, made in Cincinnati, Ohio, by the artist Louise McLaughlin. This vase has some magical elements, and Louise McLaughlin was a pioneer in pottery in the 1880s. This piece was well known and appreciated not just for its size, but also for its decoration. McLaughlin also pushed for her right to even be making pottery, because at the time it was discouraged that refined and educated women should even be working with wet clay. She promoted women's work in ceramics and wrote several books on decoration techniques with underglaze and painting, and launched the China painting technique in America. Let's take a look at her vase. What do you notice about the shape of this vase? I noticed the shape has a slightly smaller base to rest its weight and gradually gets wider as we look to the top. The shape comes in a little and the opening for the flowers goes straight up. What do you notice about the design on this vase? What do you recognize? I see white flowers, which I know are calla lilies, green leaves, and little marks of gold that shine and outline the shape of the leaves and stem. They also make little asymmetrical squares in between the leaf shapes and the blue background. These little gold marks have been painted on and have a crackle look to them. The position of these flowers is not straight up, but it's a bit tilted to the side, and I like to think of it as the plant leaning towards the sun as we would find it in nature. We are going to think about the shape of this vase and the decoration. I notice it is not symmetrical or even on both sides, so the plant has a slanting, asymmetrical quality. You might like to think of this while you're incorporating your decoration idea, where it is not equal on both sides, and also when we create our vase or vessel inspired by Louise McLaughlin. First, let's collect our materials. For this project, you'll need a drop cloth. You can use plastic or canvas, anything to protect your surface that you're working on. We'll also need some clay or dough, perhaps a plastic knife or disposable knife. You'll also need a paintbrush, or if you have another one that's a different size, that's great. We'll need some paint as well. We have some paint, and we'll need a cup of water. Potentially, if your clay or dough is very dry, a sponge is also handy. We're going to put our painting materials aside and just get started with the clay. So let's get started. So to begin, we will start with a base by creating a pinch pot. You can take a chunk of your clay or dough and pat it down on all sides, making it more like a rounded ball. And we want to make sure there's not any huge air bubbles or gaps. So you can wedge your clay on the table as if you were kneading dough, and just to get it to that rounded shape. And you can pat it all around to get it back to a ball. Once you've done this, we will start by pressing our thumb into the center of our ball of clay, making sure not to press all the way through. And we will glide the clay between our hands and fingers. Very gently, we're going to press our thumb all the way around the hole we just made, going in a circle and pinching the sides as we go. So I'm pinching with my fingers that are on the outside and just kind of gliding and pressing my thumb all around. And it's going slowly. I'm making sure I'm not pressing all the way down through my bottom of my pinch pot. But slowly we can see the opening is getting bigger. And if you have a few little cracks developing, just smooth those out. Most often you won't have to use water, but if your clay is very, very dry, just a little bit of water with a sponge, just really, really tiny. Make sure you're squeezing all the excess water out, and you can kind of put a little water in there. But most often we'll just be able to smooth it out with our fingers. So I'm going all the way around, and then I'm going to start lifting my thumb up and my fingers up, and we can see that the sides are going to get a bit taller. I'm still going to try and control how wide it gets. I don't want it to get too big. You can see from the side. And if you have any little cracks developing on the outside, you can smooth those out as well. So that our clay doesn't lose its moisture. So I'm going to put this to the side and grab a bit more clay. So I have a few pieces of clay, and I'm going to start making coils. And how to do that is you can just squeeze your pieces of clay, and then making coils, I'm just going to glide my hand and fingers without holding on to it, but just letting the clay glide between my hands and fingers on the table surface. And make sure not to let your quill get too skinny, but I'm making sure my hands are flat. You can see it's getting longer. I'll show you with another piece. And if it's still not getting skinny, you can kind of give it a little squeeze. And then keep going. You might get to a point where you need both hands. So make a few coils. You can make them as you go. It's nice to have them ready. And I'll add to my pinch pot. So I have my pinch pot. It's great if you have your knife handy. I'm just going to score, meaning putting little kind of texture cuts into the top of my pinch pot so that the coil has somewhere to go. But if your clay is very, very wet, if it's really moist, fresh out of the bag, you most likely don't need to do this. Okay. Now I'm going to press the coil and the pinch pot together. I've laid it on. I'm just giving it a little pinch. You can always grab some more clay to fill in that spot. But what I want to really do is try and pinch both the pinch pot and my coil together so they bond. And And then you can see how the outside has a seam. I'm going to do the same for the outside. And I'm just kind of overlapping the clay on this point. Smoothing out any areas. So I'm going to add a few more coils on top. Here. I could even make a little coil to add at the bottom for my base. And we can really alter the shape of our vase depending on the size of the coil. And I'm making more of a vessel, so kind of like an open bowl. But if you wanted to narrow the opening of your vessel, your pinch pot, your vase, you could start by kind of making it a little bit more narrow as you work on it from the top, so it's less open, less wide. And then when you add coils, you can start by adding them on the inside instead of the outside, or on top of each other. Just go a little bit more in. I'm going to make sure that I'm smoothing out all of these seams and pinching them together. You could also try smoothing out with your knife as well. Some little areas I missed, can smooth out with my knife. And then these little marks I can also smooth out later with my fingers. So I'm just smoothing out my edges of my vessel. You can continue to add more coils if you'd like to build some height. But once you've created your clay vessel or vase, start thinking about the floral design. White calla lilies often symbolize purity, dignity, and innocence, and you can continue with Louise McLaughlin's design or select another flower or plant you like. Perhaps you decide to include a variety of flowers, and one could be a calla lily. And if your clay is, again, very wet, feel free to let it dry a little bit before you start painting. But if it's not too wet and you're ready to paint, let's gather our materials once we've smoothed out all these little cracks and seams from our coils. So I'm going to put my extra clay aside. Grab some extra water that you might need for your paintbrush. You have some paint on a palette. That's wonderful. And I'm going to be using a few different brushes because I have 3 colors. So to begin, I'm going to think about my design idea. And I do like the idea of having an asymmetrical design like Louise McLaughlin, where it isn't equal on both sides, but shifts a little bit to one direction or another. And I'm also thinking, because I have such a wide open area for my vessel, that I might do some designs on the inside. Louise McLaughlin used slip, which is color pigment mixed with very liquid clay. For our purposes, we will use paint and directly onto the clay's surface, clay body. So I'm going to start. Make sure some of these bigger areas are smoothed out. Once you finish adding all of your painted details and designs, we would love to see what you've created. Take a picture or video and share with us on social media using the hashtag #MetKids. Thank you for joining us for this special program.